Hey class, welcome back. In this lesson we're going to look at David Hume and his empiricism. So really quick to start off, what is empiricism? It claims that knowledge comes through the senses. In its most extreme form, it would say that no knowledge at all comes about in any way except through the senses. That would be an extreme form of empiricism. And we're going to go through here and see exactly how Hume formulates his empiricism. So the main points. All knowledge comes through the senses. In order to understand this data of the senses, the stuff that is given in the senses, something else has to happen. There has to be something else going on beyond just passively receiving all knowledge from the senses. And that is the principle of habit or custom. The senses on their own do not immediately give information. Information from the senses is only intelligible through a process of habit, which associates things, which connects and links ideas together. And all knowledge of cause and effect is based on experience and habit rather than reason. This is the main claim of Hume, and a claim which will be very relevant to our later discussion of Immanuel Kant, who takes a strong opposition to this idea. So let's start out with sensation. What is sensation? How does Hume define it? How does he identify it within experience? He says, everyone will readily allow that there is a considerable difference between the perceptions of the mind when a man feels the pain of excessive heat or the pleasure of moderate warmth, and when he afterward recalls his memory of this sensation or anticipates it by imagination. These faculties, namely imagination and memory, may mimic or copy the perceptions of the senses, but they never can entirely reach the force and vivacity of the original sentiment. So what he's saying is that sensation and sentiment differs from memory and imagination and anticipation in what? In vivacity and force. He says that there's a difference of degree between the two, but a degree to which one can never surpass. So memory can never become as vivacious or as forceful as an immediate sensation. So memory, imagination are weaker forms of experience. And then he says, the most lively thought is still inferior to the dullest sensation. So no matter how strong a certain memory can become, it will never be as strong as a sensation, a real sensation. So he defines sensation that way, and already he has kind of indicated that there's something else going on besides just pure sensations coming in. And what is that? There's an association of ideas, and this is one of the big contributions of Hume's analysis, is the analysis of the idea of association. So he says, it is evident that there is a principle of connection between different thoughts and ideas of the mind, and that in their appearance to memory or imagination, they introduce each other with a certain degree of method and regularity. In our most serious thinking or discourse, this is so observable that any particular thought which breaks in upon the regular tract or chain of ideas is immediately remarked and rejected. So we link and ally together, we make associations between different things, and we base our experience on the predictability of those associations. And if something comes in on our thinking that is irrelevant to what we're thinking about, is not established in the chain of associations that we've acquired, we will reject it. So that's evidence of the fact that this is one of the strongest forces organizing our experience. That's what Hume is saying here. we have all these experiences and we link them together, we create relationships between them, and these relations are so strong that if something comes up that is irrelevant, we will just push it to the side. So Hume says that this is obviously the case, is something observable going on all the time. But he goes on further and says, though it be too obvious to escape observation that different ideas are connected together, I do not find that any philosopher has attempted to enumerate or class all principles of association. So he's saying it's evidently clear that this happens. No one's arguing about that. But no philosopher, psychologist, or anyone has gone to the right lengths of analyzing this topic and properly understanding it. What are the actual, what are the complete list of kinds of connections of associations that are possible? He says, a subject, however, that seems worthy of curiosity. To me, there appear to be only three principles of connection among ideas, namely resemblance, contiguity in time and place, and cause and effect. So let's go through these really briefly. I think that they're kind of obvious, but resemblance will be anything that we notice something, it looks similar, resembles something else. So I see this tree and I realize that it resembles other trees that I've seen before, or even that it resembles other plants, even if it's a flower or a bush or something like that. So resemblance is a way the mind connects similar experiences. Contiguity means things which are connected in time and place, some things that are near each other. So contiguous lands are ones that meet at a border, and contiguous times would be ones that come one after another without a gap in between them. So we see this happen and then this happen in time, and so we form an association that when this happens, that thing comes after it. Or we do this again with place. So if we see one thing oftentimes next to another thing, then we'll assume by an association that these things will always be next to each other. That's what association does. It forms a sort of relationship that we can expect in the future. So this makes a divide between facts of experience, the immediate kind of data given by sensation, and relationships that we draw within sensation. Lastly, he mentioned cause and effect. So what is that? So cause and effect is similar to contiguity in time. So we see this and then this follows after. We might think the first thing was the cause of the second thing, right? But it's not just contiguity in time. There's more to it than that. And he gives several arguments in order to further elucidate the nature of causality, cause and effect, this relationship, in order to show what its real nature is. What is really the nature of this kind of association between causes and effect? He says, the mind can never possibly find the effect in the supposed cause by the most acute scrutiny and examination. For the effect is totally different from the cause and consequently can never be discovered in it. So what he wants to say is that there's no way that we could look at a certain situation, one thing happens after another, and be able to immediately see in that we're accurately perceiving a causal relationship. Something else has to come about. So how does he prove this? He says, well, let's say that there is the motion of a billiard ball bumping into another billiard ball. The motion in the second ball is quite distinct from the motion of the first. Nor is there anything in the one to suggest the smallest hint of the other. A stone or a piece of metal raised in the air and left without any support immediately falls. But consider the matter a priori. There is not any reason to discover in this situation which would beget the idea of downward rather than upward. Okay, so we hold something in the air and we let it go. Now, we know that it's going to fall, but how do we know that? Well, because we've seen things fall before, and we judge it to be similar to those cases. But if we took just what was given in that immediate experience, I see this object being held there, there's nothing in that alone which tells us that it's going to fall. in order for us to get to the idea that it's going to fall when it's released, we have to be applying previous experiences to this experience in order to understand it. So he says, it is evident that the identity which we attribute to the human mind, however perfect we may imagine it to be, is not able to run several different perceptions into one and make them lose their character of distinct and difference, which is essential to them. So we see this billiard ball table, and we see the ball moving towards another ball. We see this movement as one thing, right? We see the movement of the one ball, and then it hits the other ball and the other ball moves. We see these two movements as different, and there's no way that consciousness can ever fully trick itself into thinking they're the same thing. The one is over here, the other one's over here, the one happened first, the other one happened second. The one was the cue ball, the other one was the 8 ball or something like that. There's always characteristics given in sensation which make these things different and make them unable to be put together. He says that this is either contemporary or successive. So we either see the two balls contemporary to one another, one here and one here, or we see them successively as one before the other. In both cases, we see them as different. And so how is it that we are able to connect these different things? So that's the question that he's asking. And he continues on this example of the billiard ball. This is very famous for Hume, this kind of billiard ball image of causality. He says, when I see, for instance, a billiard ball moving in a straight line towards another, even suppose movement in the second ball should by accident be suggested to me as the result of their contact or impulse, may I not conceive that 100 different events might well follow from this cause? So there's no reason we can't imagine the one ball rolling, hit the other ball, and the other ball move in a perpendicular direction, or shoot straight up, or the ball hits it and nothing happens, it just stops, or the ball rolls through it. Nothing given in the immediate sensation tells us what the outcome is going to be. And the only reason we think we know the outcome is because we've seen it happen different times before, and we apply that past experience to the present. We draw an association from the past in the present. So he says, may not these balls remain at absolute rest? May not the first ball return in a straight line or leap off from the second in any line or direction? All these suppositions are consistent and conceivable. Why then should we give the preference to one which is no more consistent or conceivable than the rest? All our reasonings a priori will never be able to show us any foundation for this preference. So a priori, that's the key. Nothing a priori tells us these laws. The ball does, in fact, move in a determinate way when it's struck by another ball. Hume is not objecting to that. What he's objecting to is that we know that in any a priori way whatsoever. He says there is no prior to experience way to know what will happen to that ball. Nothing prior to experience tells us what the causal relationship entails. So reason cannot be the source then. If it can't be a priori, then it can't be reason. That's Hume's point. He says, in a word, then, every effect is a distinct event from its cause. It could not, therefore, be discovered in the cause, and the first invention or conception of it a priori must be entirely arbitrary. And if it's entirely arbitrary, then it doesn't have any rational validity to it for Hume. So, do we perceive cause and effect in natural things? We assume that we do on a daily basis. This is why Hume asked this question. We go around our daily life, and we assume that we can perceive cause and effect. I walk across the sidewalk, assuming that it will remain sidewalk. And I step over a puddle, assuming that if I step on the puddle, I will sink into the water and get my feet wet. So I assume that there's a natural causality of things, and I use that assumption when I go around in the world on a daily basis. But what do we base that on? How do we know that that's true? This is the question that Hume is persistently asking here and interrogating. He says, our senses inform us of the color, the weight, the consistency of bread. But neither sense nor reason can ever inform us of these qualities, which fit it for the nourishment and support of a human body. So we look at bread, and what we immediately think is that is food. That is something that I could eat. We feel it, we smell it, all of these things. Our senses are telling us this is going to support the human body, that it's going to nourish us and give us nutrients. So how is it that we get to this idea of nutrients, support, that there's a kind of what he calls secret power hidden within the bread? What allows us to think that? So he goes on, if a body of like color and consistency with the bread which we have formerly eaten be presented to us, we make no scruple of repeating the experiment and foresee with certainty like nutriment and support. So in the past, we had to learn that bread is nutritious, or someone, taught us that. But in any case, we did a kind of experiment where we would eat it and then find that it was nutritious, and therefore establish a link in our thought between the appearance of it, smell, taste, the way it looks and things. But then this idea that it actually supports us and brings us nutrients, none of those are derived directly from the perception. So we have to presuppose those things or anticipate that aspect of the bread. He says, there is no known connection between the sensible qualities and the secret powers. So the nourishing power of the food is not perceived directly by the senses. We can say things like it tastes healthy, but this still is completely ignorant of the actual causes, and also is merely a expecting something to be the way it was because it was that way in the past. And this is the main insight that Hume is trying to get at here. When we make this induction, when we make this leap to saying that it's not just these perceivable qualities that we see and feel and touch and smell, but it's this hidden secret power within the thing to nourish me. So here we have this much stronger account of the problem of cause and effect than just the billiard ball. So here we're actually transporting ourselves into the thing and expecting or foreseeing that it has a certain causal efficacy, a certain causal power to it. So the associations are formed by an anticipation. We infer a nutritive power that is not given in the senses themselves. The bread which I formerly ate nourished me, and so I perceive this new thing to be imbued with the same secret powers as the thing I perceived before. I have found that such an object has always been attended with such an effect. I foresee that other objects which are in appearance similar will be attended with similar effects. So this is what is explanatory of our association. Our mind forms a relationship based on the past, based on what we have already seen. So if this is the case, then reason cannot ground cause and effect. Inference necessarily is based on experience, and this inference is necessarily illogical. It puts us in a vicious circle. So I say, I infer A must follow B, because every time A appears, so does B. I infer that one event must cause another, because one event happens, when one event happens, another always follows it. So I say that this happens after this because this happens after this. That's a faulty line of reasoning. That's not an explanation. It's begging the question. It uses what it tries to prove as the basis of its proof. So I need to prove that A follows B. How do I prove that A follows B? Because A follows B. That's what the circular logic says. So he says, all arguments concerning existence are founded on the relation of cause and effect, that our knowledge of the relation is derived entirely from experience, and that our experimental conclusions proceed upon the supposition that the future will be conformable to the past, and endeavor, therefore, the proof to this last supposition by probable arguments, or arguments regarding existence, must be evidently going in a circle, and taking that for granted, which is the very point in question. So, if all of our inferences are based on an illogical inference, we ground our inferences in an inference, and therefore we don't ground it at all. So how do we ground it? How do we say that there is knowledge? So Hume has basically pulled out the rug on all of knowledge. He tries here, I guess, to one-up Descartes. Descartes thought he did a good job of proving everything could be doubted. Hume doubles down and says, no, really, all of our knowledge, all of these relationships that we try and draw in the world are based on a completely illogical, inconsistent logically position. So how are they based? He says, this principle of custom or habit for whatever the repetition of any particular act or operation produces a propensity to renew the same act or operation without being impelled by any other reason or process of the understanding. So that is what habit is. And habit is the ultimate key here. The ground of our knowledge is habit, is the basis of our inference of cause and effect, and it is what gets us around in daily life. So the definition of habit itself shows a kind of circularity here. And for this reason, Hume says, by employing that word, we pretend not to have given the ultimate reason for such a propensity. We only point out a principle of human nature which is universally acknowledged and which is well known by its effects. Perhaps we can push our inquiry no further and pretend to give the cause of this cause. But we must contend with it as the ultimate principle, which we can assign of all our conclusions from experience. So what is habit? We define it as the repetition of any particular act or operation, so repeating a certain act, which produces a propensity to renew the same act of operation. So anytime you repeat actions and they become more capable of being repeated, then habit and custom are at work. So we can see how this can apply to association. Any association that we make that makes it easier for us to make that association will therefore be renewed and reinforced. And so if this is what habit does, and this is the basis of our inference, we reach a wall where we can't go any further. And that's what Hume is saying here. We contend that this is the ultimate principle, that there's nowhere else to go beyond this principle. So Hume has a very positive idea of habit here. We looked back at Descartes, and Descartes says that my habits are continuously pulling me in the direction of ignorance and to accept my opinions without questioning them. And so he goes through these meditations questioning them, and he says, my habits keep pulling me back. So he has a very negative idea of habit. But Hume, on the other hand, has an extremely positive view of habit. He says, custom, then, is the great guide of human life. It is that principle alone which renders our experience useful to us and makes us expect for the future a similar train of events with those which have appeared in our past. Without the influence of custom, we should be entirely ignorant of every matter of fact beyond what is immediately present in the memory and senses. We should never know how to adjust means to ends or to employ our natural powers to the production of any effect. There would be an end at once of all action, as well as the chief part of speculation. So habit is what is guiding our associations and allowing us to make connections. We have these three kinds of association, right? Resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. These are directly caused or brought about by habit. Habit is what is responsible for making those associations, what makes those associations repeatable and makes them have a greater ease of arising. So you see something and immediately associate it with something else. That's of the greatest practical importance. If I didn't do that, then everything I looked at would look completely new and have no relation to any other thing I've ever experienced. And we wouldn't know what to do with it. We wouldn't know if it was good or bad, or if I should pursue it or avoid it, or what we should do. So habit alone is what gives us that ability. So he says, all beliefs of matter of a fact or real existence is derived merely from some object present to the memory or senses, and the customary conjunction between that and some other object. Or in other words, having found in many instances that two kinds of objects, a flame and heat, snow and cold, have always been conjoined together, if flame or snow be presented anew to the senses, the mind is carried by custom to expect heat or cold and believe that such qualities do exist, and will discover itself upon a nearer approach. So habit is what allows us to form a coherence of experience. One thing should be linked to another habitually if we expect to be able to deal with things in a consistent way. So if I see fire, I had better hope that it always has heat, because I'm always going to treat it that way. And if I see snow, I expect that it will always be cold. And that way I can actually get around in the world. If things didn't have this constancy, then we wouldn't be able to deal with the world. So custom and habit, they imply a consistency, and they don't work without that consistency. That consistency has a completely illogical basis. Why are they consistent? Well, because I saw them be consistent in the past. So you're saying they're consistent because you say they were consistent? Yeah, that's illogical. That doesn't prove anything. And yet that is exactly what habit does, and that's exactly how we are able to form knowledge, according to Hume.